Hi everybody, today I want to share my mom's recipe for making traditional mooncakes. As some of you might know, Mid-Autumn Festival is coming up and my mom usually makes a huge batch of mooncakes around this time of the year, so I asked her to share her recipe. The ingredients are listed here. This is going to be a bit of a different video in that my mom is actually the one that's doing most of the work and I'm kind of just in the corner trying to help. I tried to get her to come on to do the voiceover with me, but she's too shy, so you'll have to bear with me. You want to start by making the dough first because that needs to rest for at least 2 hours or even overnight if you want. So starting with 85 grams of date syrup, and really you can use any syrup. We used to use golden syrup, but then now we switched over to date syrup. It's runnier, it sounds healthier, it's a little bit darker and helps with the color as well, but really any syrup will do. Next you want to add 20 grams of oil, and some recipes actually call for more. I think each year we shave off a couple grams just to see how little we can add, and this is probably the minimum. Next ingredient, just half a teaspoon, but super important, it's lye water, which I think is actually sodium hydroxide. Definitely make sure you get the edible version of lye water. If you're interested, the alkalinity interferes with the gluten strands from forming, so you end up with a dough that's very stretchy and pliable so that you'll be able to mold it around the mooncake filling. It's not a very expensive ingredient, and a lot of Asian recipes call for it in small amounts like this, so we've actually had this bottle for many years and kind of just take a little bit out as needed. So just continue stirring the oil and the syrup until they become emulsified. You really don't need to whip any air into it. Next, you want to add 120 grams of cake or pastry flour. You're going for low gluten here, but we actually ran out of both of them and just used all-purpose flour, which is okay too. But with the extra gluten content, you really want to make sure you stir softly, but it does become more prone to cracking. Finish bringing the rest of the dough together by hand just until you've collected all the flour crumbles from the bottom. If you're feeling the dough is kind of sticking to your finger, you can add a sprinkle more of flour in, but don't add too much, just to the point where you can get it into a neat dough ball. Once it's all come together, you want to wrap it in cling wrap, directly touching the dough to prevent it from drying out, and then let it sit at room temperature for at least 2 hours or in the fridge overnight to rest the gluten. In the meantime, you want to prep the salty eggs, so we're only using 6 eggs to make 12 mooncakes. These are mini mooncakes, so you really only need a half of yolk in each, so 6 will do for the recipe, but if you're going for full decadence, you can put a whole egg in, you just need more salty eggs. I kind of talked about these salted eggs in the runny yolk bun recipe, but just to kind of reiterate, it's basically duck egg that's been preserved in this mixture of soil, alcohol, ash, salt, and probably water for at least 40 days, and it kind of congeals the yolk inside and makes the egg white really salty. And you can actually make this at home. We've made it with chicken eggs before just because we couldn't find duck eggs. We just left it in that preservative mixture for 40 days and it actually kind of worked. So sometimes you buy them in this soil and you have to scrape the soil off and rinse it off. Sometimes it's in this kind of liquid solution and you kind of just have to rinse it off. So just a quick rinse to remove any remaining dirt. So the next step, you want to separate the yolks from the whites, and we only need the yolks, we just save the whites. The preserving process actually congeals the yolk, so you get this kind of jelly consistency. Importantly for your setup, you want to always crack your eggs into a separate bowl because with 40 days of preserving, you sometimes do get a bad egg and you don't want to ruin the rest of your batch. The egg whites, you can save it in the fridge or freezer for a scramble later on, and just keeping in mind that it's actually pretty salty, so you might want to mix it with an unsalted egg white. Once you have all your yolks, and this is my mom's tip, you want to actually rinse the yolks gently under cold water, and this removes any remaining egg whites that's coating the yolks so that when you cut into the cooked mooncake, you don't get a rim of white egg white around the yolk. So the next step, we have to bake the egg yolks first, and before we do that, we sprinkle 2 to 3 teaspoons of rose cooking wine onto it. If you don't have this, white wine or rice wine will probably do the same thing. It's just to get rid of the fishy smell, and it probably enhances the flavor just because it's a solvent for water and lipid-soluble compounds, and it's volatile. At least that's what my undergrad food science course taught. So just line them on a baking sheet and cook at 300 Fahrenheit or 156 Celsius for 6 to 8 minutes. You can use a toaster oven, but not a microwave. When the egg yolks are cooked, they become a bit more opaque, but still have that pearly tone. Now that we're getting closer to baking, you can prepare your egg wash by beating 1 egg yolk with about half a teaspoon of water, just enough to thin it out a little bit and make it easier to brush onto the mooncakes in an even layer. Because we want the egg wash to be extra smooth and make the mooncakes look good and not lumpy, you want to actually run it through a fine mesh sieve just to get out any lumps. Now 1 egg yolk doesn't look like a lot, but it's actually more than enough for egg wash for this batch of mooncakes. Once the egg yolks have cooled a bit, you can slice them in half if you're only going to use half. We're actually going to use a couple whole egg yolks, so we're only slicing the big ones in half. Now we want to start dividing the dough, so the dough that's been resting, you want to take it out, roll it into a log, and then if you're eyeballing it, I'd say divide it into 12 pieces. You'll just end up with slightly thicker dough, which I like anyway. Or if you have a scale, then you want to get 18 grams per piece, which actually makes 13 pieces from this recipe. So end up with a piece extra that you can just bake off as cookies or a taste tester. Just like how we divided the crust, you also want to divide the lotus seed paste. There's a dark one and a light one, and we're using the light one because it's more florally. It's kind of like marzipan, except it uses lotus seed ground up with sugar to make a paste instead. It's very pliable and moldable as well. You can get it from Asian wholesale food places and probably online as well. And same thing, you want to divide it up. So this one, you want to weigh the egg yolks and the lotus seed paste together, and the entire filling should be 36 grams. If you're using half a yolk, you want about 30 grams or so of the lotus seed paste, because half a yolk is about 6 grams. If you're using a whole yolk, then obviously you'll use less lotus seed paste. Once you've divvied up all the portions, we're ready to start wrapping. So the first step, you want to wrap the egg yolk in the lotus seed paste. So as we're both doing, you kind of roll it into a ball first in your palms. Use your thumb to make an indent, and then kind of just nudge and coax the lotus seed paste to cover the rest of the yolk. And I definitely do it a lot messier than my mom, but as long as it comes together, your next step is to kind of smack the filling between your two hands, and this is supposed to get rid of any air bubbles between the yolk and the lotus seed paste, so when you cut it, you don't see a gap. And then kind of just roll it back into a ball. This looks good enough. Once you've completed all your fillings, it's time to work with the dough. So roll it into a circle and sandwich it between 2 layers of cling wrap, and then just roll it out slightly so that you can cover maybe 3/4 of the surface area of the filling, and then the rest, we're actually just going to nudge it over again. So take your filling and flip your dough over the filling, and then kind of just, again, coax the dough gently over the filling, holding the filling in place with your thumb as you do, and kind of rotate, kind of like wrapping dim sum or dumpling. But no matter, the dough doesn't have any butter, it's not very temperature sensitive, it's nice and pliable and very forgiving, so kind of just roll it back into a smooth ball kind of shape, and they're good to go. So this is a mini mooncake mold. It's for 50 gram, which I think it's a standard mini mooncake. You can find these at Chinese kitchen or baking supply stores, and I'll link in the description to a couple stores in Toronto. You'll probably also find some wooden molds as well, and they're just trickier to use, so I suggest using these ones. You want to start by flouring the molds really well, especially all the crevices, to make sure your mooncake doesn't get stuck in there. And then you want to take one of your mooncake balls and roll it in a bit of a cylindrical shape, kind of like a potato spud, just so it doesn't get scraped along the sides of the mold. And then flip it around on a hard surface, press down on the square part, and then just give the spring part 3 firm presses and release them onto a baking sheet that's lined with baking paper. Hopefully you floured it really well and it comes right up. If not, you can use your fingers and kind of give it a nudge from the side. And then continue forming the rest of the mooncakes. Just remember, you want to flour the mold really well each time in between, and you can actually place the mooncakes quite closely together. They don't expand all that much, but they do need 2 to 3 centimeters in between each one for the air to circulate. Like I said, the mooncakes aren't very finicky to make, so you can actually preheat the oven after you've formed all the mooncakes. You want to get to 325 Fahrenheit or 165 Celsius, no convection. Just before putting the mooncakes in the oven, you want to give it a quick spray of water, and this helps the dough expand without cracking. You want to bake it on the middle rack for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, you want to take them out and brush on your first layer of egg wash. The 5 minutes helps the pattern set on top so your egg wash doesn't ruin the pattern. With egg wash for this, because aesthetic is really important, you want to use a nice soft brush and not the ones with like the thick silicone brush heads that I guess it's used for glazing meat on barbecues. You really want the fine bristles, and that will ensure an even spread of your egg wash instead of getting a clumpy and drippy mess. Make sure you get the sides as well, and then return them to the oven for another 10 minutes on the same settings. And then 10 minutes later, do exactly the same thing with the second layer of egg wash. I didn't have anybody to hold up the camera at a better angle, but you can kind of see that the egg wash is starting to give the mooncakes a nice golden brown color. So the second layer will add to that. And then they go back in the same settings for the last 10 minutes. These are fresh out of the oven. They smell really good. They're a really nice golden brown color, and that's from the egg wash, the lye water, and also the date syrup as well. Although tempting, you really don't want to cut into these just yet. You actually want to wait a day or two for the oils and the yolk and the lotus seed paste to kind of all even out. But we couldn't wait, so we just cut into it. And the thing is that the crust becomes a little bit more crumbly, but I wanted to show you the inside. Thank you so much for watching. Leave me questions or comments below. Wishing everyone a happy Mid-Autumn Festival or happy Mooncake Day.